Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our webinar. We will give 1 or 2 minutes for people to join. And just as a warm-up, if you would like to please use the chat box and type the country where you're from. Yes, waiting for everybody to join. Argentina, Guatemala, Chile, Colombia, Oman, Uruguay, Mexico, Brazil, Peru, El Salvador. Actually, Salvador. I'm sorry for that. Salvador Bahia from Brazil. Sorry. United Kingdom. Yes. A lot of people from different places. You are all welcome to our webinar. Argentina, Panama, Greece, Colombia again. Team Colombia is strong. Mexico. All right, so I think we can start. Welcome, everyone. The British Council and the BRAZ-TESOL EdTech Special Interest Group are pleased to welcome you all into this webinar. My name is Tassiana Balbino, and I am Business Development Manager for Exams at the British Council. We are very excited about this topic that will be discussed with you today, and we hope to spark a fruitful discussion during the session. Now, please let me introduce the British Council to you for those of you who would like to know more about the work that we do in around 200 countries and territories. The British Council was founded in 1939 as a United Kingdom charity governed by the Royal Charter and as a UK public body. We support peace and prosperity by building connections, understanding, and trust between people in the UK and countries worldwide. The British Council works directly with individuals to help them gain the skills, confidence, and connections to transform their lives and shape a better world in partnership with the UK. We support them to build networks and explore creative ideas, learn English, get a high-quality education, and gain internationally recognized qualifications. Now, I would like to introduce the leader of the BRAZ-TESOL EdTech SIG to you, my dear friend, Roberta Mesquita.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Is it cutting off a little?
Just a little bit.
So thank you for having us. As most of you might know, BRAZ-TESOL is
I think Roberta
for
frozen.
language teachers. Is it? It's cutting off, right? Let me go back to my other mic. Sorry about that. Okay.
I think we lost Roberta.
All right. Is it better now? No, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, sorry. So as most of you know, BRAZ-TESOL is an international association for language teachers here in Brazil. We are affiliated with the TESOL, and the EdTech SIG is a SIG that is dedicated to bringing educational technologies to teachers to demystify the whole technology integration into the classroom. So we are welcoming new members and anyone who is interested in bringing technology to education, please join us.
All right. Thanks, Roberta. Now I would like to briefly introduce my colleague, Aidan Holland, to you. He will be our speaker for today. So with extensive experience in English language assessment, Aidan Holland specializes in developing innovative approaches to testing that consider the diverse needs of students. Currently serving as a global assessment solutions manager. He is passionate about supporting teachers and institutions in designing assessments that are both effective and accessible. In his work, Aidan focuses on integrating digital tools and evidence-based methodologies to enhance language assessment across contexts. So, Aidan, thanks for being our speaker for today. The ground is yours.
Thank you for the introductions, Tatiana. I'll now share my screen. Can you just confirm you can see my slides okay? Brilliant. So as my colleague Tatiana mentioned, my name's Aidan Holland, and I work for the Global Assessments team at the British Council. I've got more than 20 years teaching experience, teacher training, and more recently in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working ever more in assessment, language assessment in the classroom, and also large-scale assessment, language reforms. In this session today, I'd like to talk about the rise of the ChatGPT AI models and think about how we can use them to make more engaging and exciting assessments for our learners in the classroom. Just to start out to lay the groundwork for the session, I'm very much going to be focused on teachers in their local contexts and looking at how we can use tools such as ChatGPT to make valid and reliable classroom assessments. From the outset, I want to make it clear we're not talking about, I'm not talking about supporting teachers to develop international or high stakes tests that might be used on a wide scale. This is very much these ideas are very much focused on the classroom. So let's begin. I've got 3 objectives with the session. First of all, I'd like to understand how our AI tools, and predominantly we're talking about ChatGPT, can support classroom assessment in all of the 4 skills. I'd like to consider or remind people of the importance about aligning assessments with the CEFR descriptors. So having a clear idea about what the skill is that we're teaching and making sure that any materials that we're generating using AI support really do align to these, and we're checking them against it. And the third area I'd like to end with is looking at some of the limitations and best practices when using AI generated assessments. And for those of you who've used AI, we always have this message on the screen in ChatGPT. ChatGPT can make mistakes, and it reminds us to check important information. And this is very much the premise of this session. It's to look at a number of different ways in which ChatGPT can support us to develop assessments more rapidly, and it can produce some quite effective assessments. However, it's really key from an assessment point of view, assessment, teaching and learning point of view, that we check these using the tools that we often use to develop high stakes tests and the methodologies that we're using to develop tests, such as IELTS, or the Cambridge exams, or maybe APTIS, if you're familiar with this. So these are my objectives for the session. I'd like to start with a couple of slides looking at the background. So let's frame the language assessments that I'm trying to give you some ideas for at the moment. We have to consider what our teaching context is. We're all teaching in different contexts across the world. And we have to consider what kind of approach we're using to teach language. The ideas in this session are very much focused on the communicative, teachers working within a communicative paradigm. So within a communicative paradigm, just to reiterate that we're looking at teachers that are creating real world-like situations in which students have plentiful opportunity to engage in meaningful communications with each other, where they're working to achieve and to achieve clear objectives in the tasks that the teacher is giving them. And for all of these reasons, it's engaging. Now, within this, what do we understand by classroom assessment? So the system of classroom assessment should really be designed to support learners to progress, but not only to progress, also to see their progression from class to class, from week to week, and over the course of academic periods such as academic years. Classroom assessment will probably encompass both a formative approach and a summative approach. So with the first one, methods that are used to encapsulate learning and make it clear to students what they're learning and to what extent they've learnt it. With summative assessments, they're more associated with grades and marks, and maybe given towards the end of terms or the end of a year. I'm talking about assessments that we can create for both of these purposes. They're not exclusive, they feed into each other. And even the summative approach at the end of the year, as long as it's contained within the classroom, we could use some of the ideas from the session. And the last part, just considering what are the challenges teachers face when creating classroom assessments up until now in general, before we had the support of resources like AI, ChatGPT. For me, one of the main ones is time constraints. To write good assessments which are reliable and valid takes time. And often teachers have packed work schedules and they don't have the time to dedicate to the ideas for the assessments and then forming those ideas into texts or tasks and then being able to check those tests or tasks. And that's really what I'm going to be giving you some ideas for in this session. So just to think about classroom assessment, there are plentiful opportunities for classroom assessment. I'd say most of the time we're going to be doing different types of more formative style assessments, such as informal quizzes, progress checks, maybe peer and self-assessments, self-diagnostics. These are all intended to help students see whether they're achieving the aims and the objectives or the intentions of the classes. They might be sandwiched within tests that are used at the institution, such as placement tests, end of course achievement tests, or even a baseline and proficiency test, which might be disassociated with the course. Just to reiterate that this session's very much focused within the classroom. So it's things that you can be doing either on your own or maybe, well, ideally with small groups of teachers. We're not talking about developing another version of IELTS or a Cambridge exam, for example, not to that scale. Now, with that in mind, with that context in mind, what I'm going to be urging you to do is to make sure that you have the skills that you're teaching and therefore assessing clearly defined against a set of criteria. I'm going to be talking about the CEFR, which is where this diagram comes, that represents the 6 main different band levels in the CEFR. But you can use any regional or local set of standards that you might have. Why do we need standards? We need standards to break language down not only into skills or competencies, skills and abilities, but we also need to be able to define what those skills and abilities are on a granular level so that students can gradually see progress from elementary up into proficient user A1 up until C2. So that's very much going to be a main message in the session. Let's dive into the receptive skills first. I'm going to be probably mostly focusing on the reading skill during the session, and then also giving you some comments about listening, and then having a shorter focus on the productive skills afterwards. This is because we only have 40 minutes here, and I think it's very important to touch briefly on several main points rather than maybe just focus on one skill. So I'm going to go through a number of steps that you are probably going through already, whether or not you're using a large language model such as ChatGPT. So the first step in an assessment, to create an assessment, would be to select an appropriate topic. That could potentially be from the classroom materials that you're using. If you're using communicative course books, you'll cover a range of different topics within them over the course of an academic period. You might want to create an assessment that's related to the same topic, or you might want to create an assessment that's related to a different topic. The first thing that you need to do is to establish the skills and abilities which define your target level. So we're going to be looking at some examples from B1, specifically B1 reading. So we need to break down what B1 reading actually means. What are the different skills and abilities that we can expect of the student for that level in terms of reading comprehension? From there, we want to define the type of text that we want to give to the students in the assessment and the task type that's associated with that text that will assess the comprehension. So these three steps would be no different to what you would be doing already when you're designing reading assessments, for example, and they're no different to an item writer for an exam. They would go through those steps to write a question in an exam paper for a reading. With defining the text, we're obviously talking about deciding on the genre. So we're thinking whether it's a newspaper article, a review, an essay. And in terms of the task type, we're going to be using a multiple choice, multiple matching, true or false. And these are questions that you need to decide on. An area where you can get some support and some ideas, maybe in your course books, you're overwhelmed with articles and you want some ideas for different types of text that you can use with your B1 learners. In our APTIS test at the British Council, which has publicly available test information, we can see how test item writers are trained and guided to replicate items at the same level once the exam's written, once the exam's been designed and written. Test item writers are guided to replicate certain tasks through a series of instructions which are called test specifications. I'm not suggesting here that you need to, by any means, follow such an in-depth process as a test item writer would, but they are a really good source of ideas for how you can generate some classroom assessments around the different skills. In this case, we're looking at reading. So this gives you information about the skill focus. In this particular one, it's about reading short paragraphs to comprehend the main ideas, which is a B1 skill. It can give you some ideas for different task descriptions. So in this task, the candidate's asked to read 4 short paragraphs and match people's opinions to the different paragraphs. And it can also give some information about text length. I think these 3 areas are quite useful for teachers. So you can think about the different skills, tasks, and text lengths that you might want to use in the classroom. As a note, from a test writing perspective, length doesn't necessarily correspond to difficulty. You can have a long, easy text or a short, more challenging text. Within tests like APTIS and within the CEFR, the descriptors reference comprehension at a textual level. So if you're working with the B2, C1 or C2, the texts are going to be necessarily longer, but we must make sure that they've got the correct level of challenge for the students within them, if so. For the lower levels, it doesn't make a great deal of sense to have excessively long texts for A1, A2, and to some extent B1, as it can be quite nice in class to work with quite short focused texts to really hone in on the skill. You might also think about, and as we've got some examples on the screen, the amount of time that you give students to deal with the reading comprehension and the response format. So talking about the task, whether it's multiple choice, multiple matching, you can get different ideas for task types here. Then step 4 really would come, sorry, just to recap here. So you can use these to generate ideas, to give instructions to ChatGPT to generate a text, defining the topic, the skills that you want to practice, and the genre of the text, potentially the length. And then when you've got it, it's really important at this stage to check the difficulty of the text you've generated. And you can do this, and I'm going to suggest two ways that you can do this. So we can check lexical challenge, and that's to do with word frequency mostly. So obviously, the more frequent words in a language are learned first and more quickly, and are more associated with lower levels, whereas lexis, which is of less frequent use, is more associated with the higher levels, so your B2 and above. We can get information about word frequency from, if we're a test designer, from corpus data. As teachers, I'd say a more accessible way of finding out how frequent a word is to use some common free dictionaries like Collins Dictionary, where you get some information about how frequent the words are. And you can see, you can also, by looking online, map the word frequency groupings to different CEFR levels. The second source of information is readability scales, and I'll look at that in this slide. So we can use these two indicators, the Flesch-Reading reading ease score and the Flesch-Kincaid grade level. Now on the screen it appears that they're clearly mapped to the different CEFR levels, but it's really important to note that they weren't developed in any way thinking about the CEFR level. The first one gives a score out of 100 where higher numbers indicate easier texts, and the second one indicates a grade level that aligns roughly with years of schooling. Clearly, if they haven't been developed in terms of language development proficiency, but they can indicate, and they can be a good indicator about how appropriate a text is for a different level, especially if you're working with younger learners. In our test development team, we do use some of these indicators to try to pitch the texts appropriately to the CEFR levels. And we've got two examples here. I've taken these two examples from an APDIS multiple matching reading. The one on the left was written by a human, and the one on the right was written by ChatGPT, who wrote it, feeding in the instructions that I've shown you on previous slides. What I did was I took the human generated input, so the four different texts, and asked ChatGPT to write a fifth one. On the 4 different texts originally, I looked at I did a review of word frequency, and I picked out some of the more challenging words for B1, which I put in red. And I also and I've also included the Flesch-Kincaid readability scale, which came out at 6.1, which is more or less aligns to, as you see, a B1 between 6 and 8. The output from ChatGPT against my instructions produced language which was actually a little bit more idiomatic than in the original texts, and they had expressions such as clear my mind or on the roads and dreadful, which would be at a higher level than B1. However, it was there were relatively few. The text was generally well pitched, and it only brought up the readability score by 0.2 points. So we have evidence to suggest that this would be an appropriate text to present B1 learners with. So just to recap on generating texts, we need to think about text complexity. So comparing an A2 text with a B1 text, we've got shorter, simpler sentences with common words, whereas as we're moving into the intermediate area, they become longer, connected ideas with slightly more abstract vocabulary. In terms of the task type, in the elementary levels, we're hoping for students to find explicit information, whereas in the B1, we're moving more towards attitude, opinion, and implied meaning. Cognitive demand for A2 is less, more associated with recognizing facts, whereas in intermediate levels, we're making connections. And the vocabulary load is very much more centered on high frequency words, so we need to be careful that we're not presenting them with too many low frequency words. Whereas in B1, we can start to introduce some less common words. So having this idea clear when we're reviewing the types of text that ChatGPT produces is really important. So just to recap on what I've said about reading, make sure you're targeting what I've said about reading and about generating text and items, and this is applicable to listening as well, as we'll see in a moment. Make sure you're targeting the skill and not something else. If you're wanting to target A2 recognizing facts, it might sound obvious, but we don't want to be recognizing opinion, the writer's opinion. That wouldn't be relevant to A2. It would be more relevant to B1. You might be asking students to scan when you actually want them to skim. Make sure you've got the target skill really well defined. Use a variety of text and item types. You'll probably see in communicative course books that there's many task types involve either open questions, not recommendable for assessments at all, or multiple choice. Multiple choice is fine if they're well written, but it is really important not only for your and students and enjoyment of classes to vary item types. So think about multiple matching, true or false, different ordering the paragraphs in a text. We can get some of these ideas from the APTIS test specifications that I showed you on a previous slide, and by looking at different tests. A good test will have different item types, and you can bring them into your class. As I said on the previous slide, once you've done a few checks on the output from ChatGPT, it's still important to trial the items. You might trial them on other teachers or on another person you know to get their feedback, and on the students. So you wouldn't be taking the scores from the students until you were happy that the item was testing a range of abilities. You know your students, so if everyone's getting 10 out of 10 on a reading that you produced with ChatGPT, it's obviously not a good reflection of their abilities, and that assessment would either need changing or not using. If everyone's getting 1 out of 10, again, it's too difficult. So it's really important to trial them out before you start to take information from them, because the information that you're using from a test has consequences. You don't want to be using a test where everyone gets 10 out of 10, as that would give people a false sense of their ability, and they might think that they're better than they are. Or if everyone's getting 1 out of 10, they're worse than they are. Once you have a good approach to trialing and you're happy with some of the assessments that you're developing for your materials, build up a bank of assessments. What I'm suggesting here reduces the amount of time in terms of writing of the assessments, but still requires a certain amount of planning time to check that the assessments are valid and reliable for your classroom purposes. Specifically in terms of the items, You might also want to do simple things such as asking someone to answer the questions without reading the text. If they get any of the answers right, that item's probably testing general knowledge rather than knowledge within the test. Also making sure that when people are reading the text and answering the items, that you might ask them to comment on the processes that they went through when they're answering the different questions, to think about how the level of challenge in the text and in the item types. Now, moving on to listening. The challenges with listening are centered around the fact that there are no particularly good AI-generated listening resources yet. AI-generated voices often lack natural intonation. So the process of creating a listening text would be exactly the same as creating a reading text. You just need to specify your listening skill, your task type, the text, the length, etc., the level of difficulty, and you can produce a dialogue or a monologue using ChatGPT. The issue is there's no way of translating that into a AI-generated voice, at least that I know of. I'm sure there will be soon, but at the moment, I don't have any easy way like that. So that would involve then recording in some way. So some of the workarounds are you can generate comprehension questions in the same way. You can use text-to-speech tools to create basic listening exercises. So if you find a nice extract of a listening that you'd like to do, you can use AI to capture that speech and turn it into a script that you can use. That script could be used either to re-record in a simpler way with a colleague, maybe the text that you want to use, and you can also use this to adapt existing podcast snippets, such as things from YouTube. So we can capture text quite a lot more easily than we could before. Now, in this part, I'd like to talk about using artificial intelligence for productive tasks and feedback. Now, with productive tasks, it's a lot easier to produce. There's a lot less thinking that needs to go into the actual production of the prompt. So whether that's for speaking or writing, the speaking thing that they have to do, or the piece of writing that they have to produce. Let's look at an example for speaking. So here I asked ChatGPT to produce a speaking task around the topic of hobbies, and it did quite a good job. A very simple speaking task, giving some suggestions for visuals that you can use. The student or the candidate has to choose a hobby and answer some simple questions. So A1 is very much about answering basic question and answering skills, maybe not necessarily in full connected sentences, but maybe in phrases and the odd sentence, using simple tenses and simple grammatical structures. We've got common vocabulary, and they've got the scaffold, so they've got the support that's mentioned in the CEFR that they need to be able to communicate. Asking ChatGPT to use the same topic at A2 level. Here it asked the student or the candidate to talk about two hobbies, explain one they enjoy and one they don't, and asks them to make some comparisons and give some explanations. So this again was very well aligned to the descriptors in A2, where learners are expected to give more developed answers, to express their opinion, to speak more in sentences, to make basic comparisons, and to give their reasons for doing things. So These are relatively easy to produce, and ChatGPT also understands what the CEFR is and what the different descriptors are, so it can produce appropriate tasks. Nevertheless, again, my message throughout here is check. If you think it's too easy or too hard, then you need to look at the CEFR descriptors and decide how, or to give some more instructions to ChatGPT to refine it. So using AI for productive skills, we need to, as with the receptive skills, align the task to the CEFR descriptors and have a look at the task. So eyeball the task afterwards to make sure that the prompt will elicit the expected level of response, as we've mentioned, as I've described for the A1 speaker and the A2 speaker. Moving into feedback. With feedback, you're going to be working. I'm sure there's many different contexts on the session today. So you'll be working with different national, international, and even local tests and assessments. You probably have, again, if we're working in a communicative paradigm, you're probably familiar with certain criterias to give feedback on speaking and writing. I've tried to summarize on this screen what the main speaking and writing criteria are. With speaking, we're looking at things such as fluency, coherence and cohesion, so the interconnectedness of what's said, and then the words and phrases that are used to structure the spoken discourse. Content, what's said, obviously grammatical range and accuracy, and lexical resource. Then intelligibility, pronunciation, both at the level of phonemes as well as suprasegmental features such as intonation and register. In different combinations, large-scale exams such as Aptis, IELTS, Cambridge, Trinity, all draw on these things. With writing, we're looking at clearly task achievement, organisation, which is coherent and cohesive, grammar and accuracy, lexis, register and style. This is with large international exams that are trying to assess quite a broad ability. They'll have quite complex criteria. I think with teaching, especially in the classroom with formative assessment, you'll have your broader criteria, but it is nice in any one assessment to focus on maybe one or two of these things. So this is something which you can encourage students to do when you're giving feedback to them. As for using AI for feedback, we need to use clear criteria to generate feedback on the quality of student production, and we need to be careful. I think you probably all agree that first and foremost, we must check the students' work ourselves. And then if we want to, we could compare the evaluations that we've made with ChatGPT. In testing, we've got something called intra-rater reliability. So I'll mark a set of students' writings, and then my colleague Pierre would mark the same set, and we compare our evaluations. Clearly, ChatGPT is a good colleague for doing this, to see what their impression of a piece of writing in terms of organisation is, if that's your focus. From there, we can also train students, and obviously you have to be careful here. So we don't want them mindlessly putting in instructions to ChatGPT and not thinking about the process of writing, which is where they're learning. But we could train them to get some feedback from ChatGPT on the area of speaking or writing that we're choosing to focus on. So to summarize, AI for feedback. So AI chatbots such as ChatGPT and some others can often lack the contextual understanding for language learning. So it is important for us to lead on this and acknowledge that it can be a good sounding board for giving feedback on work. So we could both use it and train our students to self-check their work to a certain extent, asking for feedback rather than for ChatGPT to rewrite it. For speaking, it is more challenging, if not impossible, to assess things such as intelligibility, as I mentioned. But speech-to-text tools can be a good way to capture spoken production. I've used voice recorders in class for many years, and now as we advance with technology, the ability to capture that speech means that to a certain extent it's more easy to set spoken homework which students can record and transcribe a lot more easily than they used to be able to. But being able to produce naturally sounding spoken speech for listening and to be able to assess speaking in the classroom context isn't within the scope of this session. So I'm coming to the end there. So I hope my main messages have been clear. I hope to have mentioned some possibilities about when we can use AI in assessment, in task creation, text generation, and to give feedback support. When not to rely, when we must be very careful with AI, is with regards to scoring and evaluating students' speaking and writing skills, as I hope I've mentioned. And also, we must keep this idea in mind that we have to triangulate and check the tasks and activities that ChatGPT is supporting us to produce to make sure they're as valid and reliable as possible. So I'll end with the message from the first screen that ChatGPT accepts it can make mistakes and it is important to check this information. I hope that's been useful.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Okay, sorry, my audio is really bad because I'm in a very private place. So, Aidan, thank you very much. That was very enlightening. I am a ChatGPT fan, and I use it for teaching, and it's great. So, some questions that the audience posted in the chat. Okay, the first one was, how about the modes of communication as outlined in the companion volume of this CEFR of 2018? How are they assessed?
I think with the companion volume, obviously they've added a lot more information in there, but I think in terms of a classroom context, I would still recommend focusing on the 4 skills as they are. If you want to look at some of the mediation descriptors that they suggest, we can still, I think it's just a matter of being clear how you shape the input, whether that's reading or listening, and what that's mediating into, whether it's speaking or writing. And ChatGPT can probably give you some good ideas about, for example, keeping the input at a lower CEFR level to the students when you're assessing the output, for example, and think about some ways of making sure you can focus on, to an extent, what the students have understood from the input.
Okay, thank you for that. And okay, a second question. What is the problem with AI generated voices?
I just think they sound, well, I mean, from the ones that I've heard, they sound quite unnatural.
So that's the only problem you see with them?
I mean, it could be it's its own type of communication. So to that extent, it could be. There's no reason why. I guess they'll advance quite quickly. So I'm not sure if there's very much point in promoting the ChatGPT. It's kind of like a baby voice at the moment. I can't think of any other than being unnatural. No, I mean, I haven't heard very many.
Okay, thank you. So another viewer asked, could you talk about prompts used to get these tasks done?
So which one?
Prompts you use to get the tasks you mentioned done.
The ones, I mean, with let's start with speaking and writing, the easier ones. So you just write, I'd like well, for A1 and A2, because they're very simple, I'd like an A1 and an A2 activity around the topic of holidays for my, well, my A1 or A2 students. And that was enough of a prompt for the speaking and writing. For the listening and the reading, I've been using this quite a lot for many different things, and the more information you give it, the better. So in this particular case for this one, I gave it a whole example of a task and asked it to extend on the task. So it was quite, that gave it a lot of information, and I explained the target level, what they were expected to do and what they will be expected to do in the task and all of this. So it did that quite easily. If you're starting, I mean, there's many, if you're looking at exams, multi-level exams such as APTIS or IELTS, Cambridge, Trinity, TOEFL, TOEIC, any of these kind of tests, you could probably put an example of them and ask them to create a specifically level targeted around a specific level. That would be one way of doing it.
Okay, thank you. So one final question. Does the British Council have specific descriptors of achievement for the criteria you spoke of?
Criteria used for which?
The criteria you spoke of. Okay, the question is, does the British Council have specific descriptors of achievement for these criteria they share?
Yes, we've got we have something called the APTIS Technical Manual, and that gives the instructions for how to write all of the tasks in APTIS, all of which are linked to specific CEFR levels. They're too detailed to be followed word for word by teachers, but they give some nice areas that you can use as a checklist to create classroom assessments. In terms of criteria, the speaking and writing criteria for APTIS are freely available on the website, as they are for IELTS, another British Council test. Those areas, I mean, usually if the test is in any way quality, the test producers have an ethical responsibility to share the criteria for the tests, and they always have some kind of combination of those different sub-skills, those different areas that are showed on the screen, such as fluency, cohesion, coherence, grammar and vocabulary, etc. So yeah, we can share the links for those in the chat or in any emails that you send out.
All right, so I guess that was it. Thank you very much, Aidan.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Roberta. Thank you, Aidan. This was a great webinar. I am following the chat as well, and everybody is pretty much saying how they enjoyed the session and how useful it was. And I have a few final remarks for those of you who would like to learn more about English assessment. First, I would like to say that for those of you who watched the webinar, you will receive an email asking if you would like to receive an attendance certificate. So please watch out for the next email we are going to send you in the next few days. I would also like to invite you for the next webinar we will have on 14 March at 12 p.m. Brazil time. The topic for this new webinar is Beyond the Test, Transforming Classroom Assessment for Young Minds, a very interesting topic as well. And this webinar will happen in a partnership with another special interest group of the BRAZ-TESOL Association, which is the Young Learners and Teens SIG. And I would also like to mention that I've pasted a few links for you on the chat for you to be able to download the technical manual for the aptitude test, and also invite you to participate. For those of you who are in Mexico and who would like to travel to Mexico, we will have an in-person conference in May, the New Directions Language Assessment Conference. It will be very interesting. So I put that link in the chat as well. And also, I think I forgot something. Yes. Oh, yeah. Please make sure you visit the BRAZ-TESOL page and the EdTech SIG page so that you can consider joining the SIG. And oh, yes, finally, we are planning to upload the recording of this webinar session to YouTube. So you will also receive an email with the link to this recording. Okay, so thanks again for all of you who attended the webinar. I hope you have enjoyed it and see you next time.